It was a bright, sunny afternoon in Pinewood Grove. This was a small, quiet neighborhood where nothing big or exciting ever seemed to happen. The houses were neat, the lawns were green, and the streets were so calm you could hear the birds chirping all day long. Most people thought it was just a boring little place, or so they believed. But something wild was about to shake things up, and it all started with a guy and his dog. Say hello to Jake Miller. Jake was a regular guy, not too tall, not too short, with messy brown hair and a big smile. He had just moved into Pinewood Grove a few days ago. His new house was still a mess, boxes everywhere, stuff spilling out, and he didn't even know where he packed his socks. Jake was still figuring things out, like where the grocery store was or which street led to the park. He wasn't fancy or special, just a guy trying to settle in. And then there was Max. Max was Jake's dog, a big, goofy golden retriever with floppy ears and a wagging tail that never stopped. Max was the happiest dog you'd ever meet. He loved chasing squirrels, sniffing flowers, and rolling in the grass. That sunny afternoon, Jake decided to take Max for a walk. Max bounced out the door, his bright red leash swinging back and forth as he trotted along. That leash was super bright, like a fire truck or a cherry popsicle. Jake picked it because Max looked so happy with it, and it was easy to spot when Max ran off to sniff a bush or chase a butterfly. The two of them walked down the street, just enjoying the day. Jake waved at a few people watering their gardens. Max barked hello to a tiny gray cat sitting on a fence. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, and nice. But not everyone in Pinewood Grove was feeling so friendly. Someone was watching them, someone who didn't like what she saw. Across the street, behind a window with perfect white curtains, stood Linda Harper. Linda wasn't just any neighbor. Oh no, she was the queen of the HOA. What's an HOA? It's a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood, like no loud music or keep your grass short. Linda loved rules more than anything. She loved them so much she made sure everyone followed them or else. She had sharp eyes like a hawk, always looking for trouble. And her temper? It was like a volcano, hot, loud, and ready to explode. Linda's house was perfect. Her grass was cut just right, her flowers were in straight rows, and her mailbox didn't have a single scratch. She wore fancy clothes and big sunglasses, even when she was just standing in her yard. To Linda, Pinewood Grove was her kingdom, and she was the boss. If something didn't fit her rules, she'd fix it fast or make a big fuss until it was gone. So, when Linda peeked out her window and saw Jake and Max walking by, she didn't smile or wave. Nope. Her eyes locked onto that bright red leash, and her face turned sour, like she'd just bitten a lemon. To her, Jake and Max weren't just a guy and his dog. They were trouble. Big trouble. That red leash. It wasn't just a leash to Linda. It was a problem, a giant, red, waving problem that didn't belong in her perfect little world. Jake didn't know it yet, but Linda was already making plans. She didn't like new people moving in unless they did things her way. And a guy with a dog on a bright red leash? That was not her way at all. She stood there, arms crossed, staring out her window as Jake and Max kept walking. Max stopped to sniff a tree, and Jake laughed as the dog's tail wagged like crazy. They had no idea a storm was coming, a storm named Linda. See, Linda had a rule book for the neighborhood. It was a big book full of boring stuff like paint your house beige and no loud toys in the yard. She carried it around like it was a treasure map. And in that book, there was something about leashes. Linda remembered it clear as day. Leashes had to be plain colors like gray, beige, or white. Red. Red wasn't on the list. Red was loud. Red was wrong. And Linda wasn't going to let it slide. Jake and Max kept walking, happy as can be. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and the day felt perfect. Jake hummed a little song, and Max barked at a bird flying overhead. They turned the corner, out of sight from Linda's window. But Linda didn't forget. She tapped her foot, her mind racing. She was already thinking of ways to stop this leash disaster. Maybe a letter. Maybe a meeting. Maybe something bigger. What Jake didn't know, what nobody in Pinewood Grove knew yet, was that this little walk with Max was about to start something huge. That red leash wasn't just a piece of rope. It was like a match, ready to light a fire. And Linda? She was about to make everything explode. But here's the fun part, Linda didn't know something either. Jake had a secret. A big one. and it was going to turn her perfect little neighborhood upside down. Linda Harper didn't wait a single second. The moment she saw that bright red leash swinging on Max, her blood started boiling. She threw open her front door and marched right out of her perfect house. Her arms were crossed tight across her chest, and her frown was so big and deep it looked like it could scare a bear away. She stomped across her neat little lawn, her shoes clicking loud on the sidewalk, heading straight for Jake and Max. Jake was just standing there, holding Max's leash, when Linda stopped right in front of him. She glared at him with her hawk-sharp eyes. "Excuse me, young man," she shouted, her voice loud and grumpy, like a teacher mad at a kid for talking in class. "That leash color is not allowed in the HOA rules. Leashes have to be boring colors: beige, gray, or white. Red. Red is awful. It's an eyesore. An eyesore means something ugly that hurts your eyes to look at, and to Linda, that red leash was the ugliest thing she'd ever seen." Jake blinked at her, his mouth open a little. He didn't know what to say. He tilted his head, confused, and scratched his messy brown hair. It's just a leash, ma'am," he said, his voice soft and unsure. "Max likes it. It's his favorite." He looked down at Max, who was sitting there, wagging his big fluffy tail like nothing was wrong. Max didn't care about Linda's yelling. He just wanted to sniff the grass and chase a bug he saw crawling by. But Linda? Oh, she wasn't happy with Jake's answer. Not one bit. Her face got even redder, like a tomato about to pop. She pointed her finger at Jake, sharp and straight like a sword ready to poke him. "No excuses," she snapped. "You'll hear from the board about this. People like you ruin our community." Her voice was so loud that a bird in a nearby tree flew away, scared. Then she spun around, her fancy skirt swishing, and stormed back to her house. She slammed her door so hard the windows shook a little. Jake just stood there, watching her go. He scratched his head again, still not sure what just happened. "Wow," he mumbled to himself. "She's really mad about a leash." Max looked up at him with his big, happy dog eyes and barked once, like he was saying, "Don't worry, Jake. I'm fine." Jake smiled at Max and shrugged. "Guess some people don't like red," he said, laughing a little. Then they kept walking, Max's red leash swinging as he bounced along, sniffing every flower he could find. But Linda wasn't done. Not even close. Back in her house, she was already planning her next move. She grabbed her big HOA rulebook off the shelf. It was thick and heavy, full of pages and pages of boring rules she made everyone follow. She flipped through it fast, her fingers tapping the paper. "Aha," she said to herself when she found the page she wanted. It said, clear as day, all pet leashes must be neutral colors. Neutral colors are plain ones, like gray or beige, nothing fun or bright. Red wasn't neutral. Red was trouble. And Linda loved catching trouble. She sat down at her shiny kitchen table and started writing a letter. Her pen scratched the paper fast as she wrote mean words about Jake and his ugly red leash. She called him a rule breaker. She said he didn't belong in Pinewood Grove. "I'll show him," she muttered, her frown getting deeper. "He can't just move in here and do whatever he wants." Linda thought she was the boss of everything, and she wasn't going to let some new guy with a goofy dog mess up her perfect neighborhood. Meanwhile, Jake and Max were back home. Jake tossed Max a treat, and the dog caught it in the air, tail wagging like crazy. Jake plopped onto his couch, still surrounded by unpacked boxes. He thought about Linda and her big, loud fuss. "She's nuts," he said to Max, who barked in agreement. "It's just a leash. What's the big deal?" He shook his head and laughed again. To Jake, it was silly. To Max, it didn't matter at all, he just liked being with Jake. But here's the thing, Linda didn't know everything. She thought Jake was just some random guy who moved in with a silly dog. She thought he was nobody special, just a troublemaker with a leash she hated. But she was wrong. Jake wasn't just a regular guy. He had a secret, a big, juicy secret that Linda couldn't even guess. And that secret? It was going to flip her perfect little world upside down, like a pancake falling off a plate. See, Jake wasn't scared of Linda's yelling or her mean letters. He didn't care about her rules as much as she thought he should. He just wanted to live his life and let Max have fun. But Linda's big temper tantrum about the leash was only the start. She was picking a fight she didn't even know she couldn't win. Every time she glared at that red leash, every time she wrote a nasty note, she was stepping closer to a surprise she'd never see coming. The neighborhood was quiet again after Linda's outburst. The sun was still shining, kids were riding bikes down the street, and birds were singing in the trees. Jake and Max didn't think much more about it that day. They went back to unpacking. Well, Jake unpacked, and Max chewed on a toy bone. But Linda? She was steaming mad, plotting and planning behind her perfect curtains. She thought she had all the power. She thought she could boss Jake around and make him change that leash. What she didn't know was that Jake wasn't just watching her yell and walk away. He was noticing things. Little things. Like how Linda acted like she owned the whole street. Like how she stared at everyone, not just him. Jake wasn't loud or mean like her, but he was smart. And that secret he had. It was waiting, quiet and sneaky, ready to pop out when the time was right. So, the tension was building like a rubber band, stretching tighter and tighter. Linda thought she was in charge, but Jake wasn't as simple as he looked. That red leash was more than just a color to her, it was a war. And she was ready to fight. But what would happen when her fight hit something bigger than she expected? You'll have to wait and see. Days went by after Linda's big yelling fit, but she didn't forget about Jake and that red leash. Not even a little bit. She was like a dog with a bone, she just wouldn't let it go. Every day, she found new ways to be mad about it. She sat at her shiny kitchen table and wrote nasty letters to Jake. She called them official HOA warnings. The letters were mean, with big, angry words like leash violation and bad neighbor. She said Jake was breaking the rules and making Pinewood Grove look messy. She even wrote, "Fix it now or you're in trouble," and mailed them to his house. But that wasn't all. Linda turned into a sneaky spy. She stood by her window with her perfect curtains pulled back just a tiny bit, watching Jake and Max. She held a little camera and snapped pictures of Max every time they went for a walk. Click. 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 She took shots of Max sniffing bushes, chasing his tail, and wagging that bright red leash. She acted like a detective trying to catch a bad guy, but all she was catching was a happy dog. Jake saw her peeking once and waved, but Linda just ducked behind the curtain real fast. Weird, huh? Jake got the letters in his mailbox and read them. He couldn't help but laugh. "Leash violation," he said to Max, holding up one of the papers. "She's crazy." Max barked and wagged his tail, like he thought it was funny too. Jake didn't care much about Linda's notes. He tossed them in a pile with his moving boxes and kept living his life. To him, it was just silly stuff from a grumpy lady. But then, he started noticing strange things about Linda that made him tilt his head and think. One night, Jake was taking out his trash. It was dark outside, with stars twinkling in the sky. He dragged his garbage can to the curb when he saw something odd. Linda was across the street, sneaking around. She had a flashlight in one hand, and she was digging through a neighbor's trash cans. She pulled out old bags and papers, looking at them like she was hunting for treasure. Jake hid behind his can and watched. "What's she doing?" he whispered to himself. Linda mumbled something, then stuffed a paper in her pocket and hurried back to her house. Super sneaky, right? Another day, Jake was walking Max when he heard Linda's voice booming down the street. She was yelling at some kids riding their bikes. "Slow down," she shouted, waving her arms like a wild bird. "You're going too fast. You'll ruin the street." The kids pedaled away, giggling, but Linda kept hollering until they were gone. Jake scratched his head. "She's bossy about everything," he said to Max. Max just tilted his head and barked, like he was saying, "Yup, she's nuts." Jake started to see that Linda wasn't just grumpy about his leash. She was sneaky and mean to everyone. She acted like she owned Pinewood Grove, telling people what to do all the time. Jake wondered why she cared so much about little things like a leash or kids on bikes. It didn't make sense. But he didn't know yet that Linda was hiding something big. Something really big. And every letter she sent, every picture she took, was bringing her closer to getting caught. Then, one morning, things got even weirder. Jake stepped outside to grab his mail. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky pink and orange. Max was still inside, chewing a toy. Jake yawned and opened his front door when he saw something stuck to it, a note. It was taped right there, written in big, messy letters, "Change the leash or else." Jake pulled it off and stared at it. The words were so mad they almost jumped off the paper. He shook his head and laughed a little. "This lady's nuts," he muttered. "Or else what? She gonna chase me with her rule book." He crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. But then, just as he turned to go back inside, he heard something loud. Sirens. Wee-oh-oh, wee-oh-oh. 2 police cars came rolling down the street, their lights flashing red and blue. Jake froze. Max poked his head out the door, his ears perked up. The cars didn't stop at Jake's house, though. Nope, they pulled right up to Linda's perfect little house across the street. The tires crunched on her driveway, and the sirens went quiet. 2 police officers stepped out of the cars. They were tall and serious, with shiny badges on their shirts. One carried a big stack of papers, and the other had a walkie-talkie crackling with voices. They walked up to Linda's door, their boots thumping loud. Jake peeked from his porch, staying half-hidden behind the door. Max wagged his tail and tilted his head, like he was asking, "What's happening, Jake?" Jake shushed him and whispered, "I don't know, buddy. Let's watch." Linda's curtains moved a little, like she was peeking out. Then her door flew open, and there she was, still in her fancy robe and big sunglasses. "What's this about?" she snapped at the officers, her voice sharp and annoyed. The officers didn't smile. They just stood there, looking at her like they meant business. Jake couldn't hear everything they said, but he caught a few words: complaints and trouble. Linda's face turned pale, like she'd seen a ghost. What was going on? Jake's heart beat a little faster. He didn't know why the police were there, but it was exciting, like something from a movie. Had Linda done something bad? Was it about the leash? No, that'd be silly. It had to be bigger than that. Max barked once, quiet and curious, and Jake patted his head. "SHH, Max. Let's see what happens," he said. He stayed on his porch, watching, wondering. Linda was in trouble, and he could feel it. But why? What had she done? The air felt thick, like something big was building up. Linda's mean letters, her sneaky trash digging, her yelling at kids, it was all adding up. Jake didn't know the whole story yet, but he was starting to guess that Linda wasn't just a bossy neighbor. She was hiding something. And whatever it was, the police knew about it now. Jake's secret, the one Linda didn't know, was still safe, but it was getting closer to coming out too. Things were heating up in Pinewood Grove, and fast. That afternoon, everything went wild in Pinewood Grove. Linda Harper totally lost it. She couldn't hold her temper anymore, and it all exploded like a big balloon popping. She ran out of her perfect house and stood right in the middle of her green lawn. Her arms were waving like crazy, and she held her phone up high, screaming into it so loud the whole street could hear. "Yes, 911? This is an emergency," she yelled. "There's a man here breaking HOA rules with a red leash. It's awful. Send someone now." Her voice was so shrill it sounded like a whistle, and her face was redder than Max's leash. Jake was across the street, standing on his porch with Max by his side. He watched Linda flipping out and tried so hard not to laugh. It was funny to him she was calling the police about a leash. A leash. He covered his mouth with his hand, his shoulders shaking as he giggled quietly. Max wagged his tail and looked up at Jake, his tongue hanging out, like he was saying, "What's so funny?" Jake whispered to him, "She's nuts, Max. Totally nuts." He couldn't believe Linda was this mad about something so small. But then, something big happened. The 2 police officers who were already at Linda's house from earlier that morning turned around slow and steady. They'd been standing by their cars, talking quiet and serious, when Linda started her yelling. Now, they faced her with stern looks on their faces. Stern means they weren't happy or joking, they meant business. One officer, a tall guy with a shiny badge, stepped forward. He held up his hand to stop Linda's shouting. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and calm, "put the phone down. We're not here for a leash." Linda froze mid-scream. Her mouth was open, and her eyes got huge, like 2 big round cookies. She still held the phone to her ear, but she wasn't yelling anymore. "What?" she screeched, her voice cracking like a broken toy. She looked at the officers like they just said the silliest thing ever. "What do you mean you're not here for the leash? I just called you." That man, she pointed across the street at Jake, her finger shaking. He's breaking the rules. He's ruining everything. The officer didn't blink. He shook his head and took another step closer to her. No, ma'am, he said, loud and clear so everyone could hear. We're here for you. Linda's jaw dropped so fast it almost hit the grass. Her phone slipped from her hand and landed with a thud on the lawn. She stared at the officers, her fancy sunglasses sliding down her nose. Me, she squeaked. What are you talking about? I'm the good one here. The second officer, a lady with short hair and a big stack of papers, stepped up next to the tall guy. She held those papers up high, like a teacher showing off a test. We've got complaints, she said, her voice strong. Lots of them. People in this neighborhood are tired of you. She flipped through the papers, reading bits out loud. Harassment. Threats. Even stealing mail. And she paused for a second, looking right at Linda. We found proof you've been faking HOA fines to pocket the money. Jake's eyes went wide when he heard that. He was still on his porch, peeking out, and his mouth fell open too. Whoa, he whispered to Max. She's been stealing. Max barked once, loud and sharp, like he understood every word. His tail wagged even faster, like he was excited about the big news. Jake couldn't believe it. Linda wasn't just bossy, she was a crook. A real bad guy hiding behind her perfect house and fancy rules. Linda's face changed fast. First, she looked shocked, like someone had splashed cold water on her. Then she got mad again. That's ridiculous, she shouted, stomping her foot. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one keeping this place nice. You've got no proof. She waved her arms around, trying to look big and important, but her voice was shaky now. She didn't sound so sure anymore. The tall officer crossed his arms. Oh, we've got proof, he said. Lots of it. Neighbors told us you've been picking on them for years, yelling, sending mean letters, making up rules. And we checked the HOA bank stuff. You've been taking money from fines and keeping it for yourself. That's stealing, ma'am. The lady officer nodded and held up one paper. We even found fake letters you wrote. You signed them with other people's names to trick everyone. Linda's perfect mask, the one that made her look like the queen of Pinewood Grove, was slipping off fast. Her fancy sunglasses fell to the grass, and her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She didn't know what to say. Neighbors started coming out of their houses now, peeking from porches and windows. They whispered to each other, pointing at Linda. She stole money, one lady said. I knew she was mean, said a guy with a lawnmower. The whole neighborhood was waking up to see who Linda really was. Jake watched it all, his heart thumping with excitement. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Linda had been so loud and bossy, acting like she was better than everyone, but she was the one doing bad stuff. Max barked again, jumping a little on the porch. Jake patted his head. Good boy, he said. Looks like she's in big trouble now. He grinned, feeling like he was in a superhero movie where the bad guy finally gets caught. Linda tried to argue more. This is a mistake, she yelled, her voice getting squeaky. I'm not a thief. I'm helping this place. But the officers weren't listening. The tall one pulled out a little notebook and started writing stuff down. The lady officer picked up Linda's phone from the grass and handed it to her. You can call someone if you want, she said, but you're coming with us to talk about this. The neighbors got closer, standing on the sidewalk now, watching with big eyes. Some kids rode up on their bikes, the same ones Linda yelled at before, and giggled behind their hands. Linda's perfect world was falling apart, and everyone could see it. Her fancy robe was wrinkled, her hair was messy, and her loud voice wasn't so loud anymore. She looked small and scared, like a bully who got caught and didn't know what to do. Jake leaned against his porch railing, still grinning. That red leash, the one Linda hated so much, had started all this. Well, sort of. It wasn't really the leash. It was Linda's own sneaky ways that got her in trouble. And now, the whole neighborhood was about to find out the truth. Linda wasn't the queen she pretended to be. She was a trickster who got busted. And Jake? He was just a guy with a dog, but he felt pretty good watching it all go down. Linda didn't give up easy. She stood there on her lawn, yelling at the police officers even after they told her she was in big trouble. This is wrong, she shouted, her voice squeaky and mad. I didn't do anything bad. You've got no proof. She waved her arms like a kid throwing a fit, trying to make the cops believe her. But the officers? They weren't buying it. Not one bit. The tall officer shook his head, and the lady officer with the papers just stared at Linda, calm and serious. They knew the truth, and Linda couldn't talk her way out of it. Neighbors started coming out of their houses now. Doors creaked open, and heads poked out, first just a few, then a whole bunch. People stood on their porches or peeked from windows, whispering to each other. "What's happening?" one lady asked. "Linda's in trouble," a man answered, sounding surprised. Turns out, Linda had been mean to everyone for years. She made up silly rules like no loud laughing or no fun colors and bossed people around like she owned Pinewood Grove. She bullied kids, yelled at grown ups, and acted like the queen of everything. But now, that was all over. She was done. The officers didn't waste time. They took Linda by the arms, gentle but firm, and started walking her to their patrol car. Her fancy robe dragged on the grass, and her messy hair bounced as she tried to pull away. "Let me go," she whined, but the cops kept moving. The car door was open, waiting for her, its lights still flashing red and blue. Everyone watched, eyes big, as Linda's big, loud world got smaller and smaller. Jake was still on his porch across the street, Max sitting next to him. He couldn't help himself, he had to say something. "Hey, Linda," he called out, his voice loud and cheeky. Max says hi. He grabbed that bright red leash, the one Linda hated so much, and held it up high. Then he waved it back and forth, grinning big. Max barked, his tail wagging like crazy, like he was in on the joke. The neighbors burst out laughing. Kids giggled, grown ups chuckled, and even the officers smiled a little. Linda's face? It turned as red as that leash. She glared at Jake, her eyes squinting mean, but she couldn't say anything back. She was too busy getting led to the car. The patrol car door shut with a loud thunk, and Linda was inside. The officers got in too, and the sirens chirped once as they drove off. The crowd watched until the car disappeared around a corner. Then everyone started talking at once. "She's gone," a kid shouted, jumping up and down. "Good riddance," said an old man with a cane. Pinewood Grove felt different already, lighter, happier, like a big storm had finally passed. A few days later, Jake got a letter in his mailbox. He thought it might be another mean note from Linda, but when he opened it, he smiled. It wasn't a fine or a warning, it was a thank you. The real HOA board, the nice people who actually ran things, wrote it. They said they'd been trying to catch Linda for months. She'd been sneaking money and making trouble for so long, but nobody could prove it until now. Jake's little leash drama, with that bright red leash, had stirred everything up. It made Linda so mad she messed up, and the police finally got her. "Thanks, Jake," the letter said. "You and Max helped us a lot." Jake showed the letter to Max, who barked and licked his hand. "We're heroes, buddy." Jake laughed. Linda was gone, and Pinewood Grove was free from her bossy ways. Justice was served, and it felt good, like winning a game after a tough fight. After all the craziness with Linda, Jake and Max finally got to settle into Pinewood Grove for real. No more mean letters, no more yelling, no more sneaky spying from across the street. The neighborhood felt different now, lighter, happier, like everyone could take a big, deep breath and relax. Kids rode their bikes again without getting shouted at. Neighbors waved and smiled at Jake when he walked Max. Even the birds seemed to sing a little louder. It was like the whole place woke up from a grumpy dream, all because a guy and his dog shook things up. Jake loved his new home now. He finished unpacking his boxes, well, most of them, and found his missing socks. He put up a little dog bed for Max by the window, where Max could watch squirrels and wag his tail all day. That bright red leash still hung by the door, ready for their next walk. Jake didn't change it, and nobody cared anymore. It was just a leash, but it had started something huge. Funny, huh? A guy and his goofy golden retriever accidentally turned everything upside down in Pinewood Grove. Who would have thought? Looking back, it's kind of wild how it all happened. Sometimes, the smallest things like a red leash can pull out the biggest secrets. Linda acted so big and bossy, like she was the queen of everything. She made rules, pointed fingers, and told everyone what to do. But that leash? It made her so mad she couldn't hide anymore. It was like a little thread that unraveled her whole sneaky plan. She'd been tricking people, stealing money, and being mean for years, but nobody knew until that leash got her all worked up. Crazy how something so tiny can show the truth, right? And here's the cool part, the people who act all high and mighty like they're better than everyone usually have something to hide. Linda walked around with her fancy sunglasses and perfect lawn, acting like she owned the world. But deep down, she was scared of getting caught. She bullied people to keep them quiet, but it didn't work forever. Jake didn't even try to fight her, he just walked his dog. But that was enough to show who she really was. So maybe the loudest, bossiest people aren't as strong as they look. Maybe they're just pretending. What do you think about all this? What's your big takeaway? A takeaway is something you learn or remember from a story. Maybe it's that little things can make a big difference. Or maybe it's that being nice is better than being bossy. Or maybe you just think Max is the best dog ever. I wouldn't blame you. Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you liked or what you learned. Oh, and let me know where you're reading this from today, your house, school, or somewhere fun. If you had a blast with this wild ride, give it a big thumbs up. It was a crazy story, right? A leash, a mean lady, some cops, and a happy ending. What's not to love? Share it with your friends if you think they'd like it too. Tell them about Jake and Max and how they accidentally became heroes. And don't worry, this isn't the end for us. I've got more stories coming, so stick around. See you in the next one, friends. Bye for now.